Caleb Dawson pressed his palm flat against the girl's back and felt her ribs shudder under his hand. Shallow, desperate breaths, the kind a person makes when breathing itself has become an act of courage. She was maybe 10 years old. Her feet were bare and bleeding. Her dress had been torn at the shoulder and tied back together with what looked like a strip of feed sack. And when he turned her face toward the light, he saw the bruise that ran from her left cheekbone all the way down to her jaw, dark as a thundercloud shaped like a man's knuckles. "Lord Almighty," he whispered. She opened her eyes, brown terrified and somehow still fighting, and said 2 words before she lost consciousness entirely. "They hurt me." If you've ever watched someone come back from a place so dark they forgot the way out, then stay with me because this story is for you. Subscribe to this channel, hit that notification bell, and drop your city in the comments below. I want to know how far this story has traveled. Let's begin. Caleb Dawson had not opened his front door with any expectation of the world on the other side of it. That was simply how he had lived for the past 7 years, opening doors out of habit, moving through mornings out of obligation, eating because the body demanded it, and sleeping because exhaustion eventually won out over grief. He was 57 years old, and he had the hands of a man 20 years older than that, cracked at the knuckles, stained permanent brown from walnut stain and linseed oil. The hands of a carpenter who had worked through every feeling he'd ever had rather than speak it aloud. He'd been on his way to the porch to check the sky. August in Wyoming had a way of building heat so thick you could lean against it, and he'd been watching the clouds to the west all afternoon, wondering if rain would come before nightfall, and save him the trouble of hauling water to the kitchen garden his late wife Clara had planted the spring before she died. He still kept that garden going. He couldn't have told anyone why exactly. It wasn't sentimentality, or at least that's what he told himself. It was just that the tomatoes kept coming up whether he wanted them to or not, and it seemed wrong to let a living thing die out of pure stubbornness. He pushed open the screen door. She was already falling. He caught her more by instinct than intention, his left arm sweeping out and taking her weight before his mind had fully registered what was happening. She was small, lighter than he expected, which frightened him more than her appearance did, because light meant hungry, and hungry meant this had been going on for some time. "Whoa now," he said, which was a ridiculous thing to say to an unconscious child, but it was what came out. He lowered himself to one knee on the porch boards and got her settled across his thighs, one hand cradling her head. She was breathing. He made himself confirm that first before he looked at anything else, because the looking was going to take something from him, and he needed to be steady for it. She breathed. Then he looked. The bruise on her face was the worst of what was visible, but it wasn't the only thing. There was a welt that ran along her left forearm, raised and pink at the edges, the kind of mark left by something narrow and deliberate, a strap or a switch, or worse. Her feet were in terrible shape. Whatever walking she'd done to reach his porch, she'd done it without shoes, and the soles were cut and crusted over in ways that made his jaw tighten. Her hair had been braided at some point, and the braid had mostly come undone, and there were leaves caught in it, which told him she'd been sleeping outside, or running through brush, or both. "Child," he said quietly, "can you hear me?" Her eyelids moved. Not open, but moved. "You're safe," he said. "You're on my porch. My name's Caleb. I'm not going to hurt you." He said it again, softer. "You're safe." He carried her inside. He had not carried anyone in 7 years. The weight of another human body in his arms was a sensation so specific and so remembered that it hit him somewhere behind the sternum, hard enough that he had to stop in the middle of his front room and breathe through it. He set her on the long settle near the window, the one Clara had covered in old grain sacking because the original fabric had worn through, and he went to the kitchen and pumped water into his cleanest basin and found the linen he kept folded in the sideboard drawer. When he came back, she was watching him. "You're awake," he said. "I'm sorry," she said. Her voice was small and roughened the voice of someone who had been crying for a long time and then stopped because crying required energy she no longer had. "I didn't know where else to go." "Don't apologize. He pulled the low stool close and sat on it, setting the basin on the floor. "What's your name?" "Emmy." She swallowed. "Emmy Cole." "How old are you, Emmy Cole?" 10. She looked at the basin, then at his hands. "Are you going to clean them?" "My feet. If you'll let me." She nodded, and something in the way she nodded, careful, considered, like she was calculating the risk of trust, told him more than anything else she might have said. He worked slowly. He had cleaned enough wounds in his life to know that speed was the enemy, not for medical reasons, though those applied too, but because a frightened creature, human or otherwise, needed time to learn that the hands touching them meant something different than the hands that had hurt them. He talked while he worked. Not about anything important. The weather, the kitchen garden, the fact that he'd seen a red-tailed hawk building a nest in the cottonwood out back, which was unusual for this late in the season. She let him talk. After a while, she stopped watching his hands and started watching his face, which he took as a good sign. "Who brought you here?" he asked when he'd moved on to her arm. "Nobody. I walked." "From where?" She hesitated. "Emmy." He kept his voice even. "I'm not asking so I can send you back. I'm asking because I need to understand what happened to you." "The Cole Ranch," she said. "It's about 4 miles east." The Cole Ranch. He knew of it. Most people in Harlan County knew of the Cole Ranch, or more accurately, they knew of Darius Cole, who owned the eastern portion of it and had opinions about the western portion that had been generating legal disputes for the better part of a decade. "Is Darius Cole your kin?" Her whole body changed. It was subtle, a slight drawing inward, a stiffening in the shoulders, but he felt it under his hands. "He's my uncle," she said. Caleb set down the cloth. He looked at her arm. He looked at the welt on her face. Then he looked at her eyes, which were holding his with a steadiness that must have cost her considerable effort. "Did your uncle do this to you?" The silence lasted long enough that he thought she wasn't going to answer. Then she said, "He has a whip. Braided leather. He uses it on the horses when they don't mind." She paused. "And on other things." Caleb picked up the cloth again. His hands were completely steady. He was rather proud of that. "Where is your father?" he asked. "That's why I came here." She reached into the front of her dress, the movement careful, like it hurt to twist, and produced a folded envelope, the paper soft and water-stained at the creases. "Papa gave this to Widow Hargrove before he left for Cheyenne. She gave it to me this morning before Uncle Darius found out I was there. She said to bring it to you." Caleb took the envelope. His name was on the front. Not his full name, just Caleb written in a hand he didn't recognize. He turned it over. The seal had been broken, which meant Emmy had read it, or Widow Hargrove had, or both. "Go ahead," Emmy said. "She told me what it says." He unfolded the letter. It was 2 pages written close and careful, the handwriting of a man who'd had some schooling and used it sparingly. The man identified himself as Samuel Cole, Emmy's father, who had gone to Cheyenne to file certain legal documents and had reason to believe he might not make it back before matters at the ranch reached a critical point. He explained briefly, and without self-pity, that his brother Darius had been contesting ownership of the Western Range since their mother's death 2 years prior, that the contest had recently moved from legal maneuvering into something more direct and more frightening, and that he had hidden his copy of their mother's original will in the tack room at the main ranch house, behind the third board, on the left wall, in a tin box. He explained that the will designated the Western Range, the main house, and the Mustang herd solely to Samuel and his heirs. He explained that Darius knew this and had been trying by various means to ensure the will never saw the inside of a courtroom. And then, in the last paragraph in handwriting that was slightly less controlled than the rest, Samuel Cole wrote that if something had happened to him, and if Emmy had made it to Caleb Dawson's house, he was asking Caleb to look after his daughter. He had named Caleb in the documents as Emmy's legal guardian, should Samuel be unable to fulfill that role himself. He had also written, "I know I have no right to ask this of you. I know we are barely more than neighbors who have nodded at each other across a fence line. But Widow Hargrove says, you are a good man, and Emmy's mother said the same before she passed, and I have no one else I trust with my daughter's life." Caleb read it twice. Then he folded it back along its original creases and set it on the settle beside Emmy's knee. "Your papa is a careful man," he said. "He knew Uncle Darius would come after me." Emmy's voice was flat in the way that voices go flat when the speaker has run out of room for fear. "He came last night. I hid in the loft. But he found me this morning and he said—" She stopped, swallowed, started again. "He said I didn't have any rights to anything. He said Papa had probably run off and left me, and that I was his responsibility now, and that I'd better learn to be useful, or he'd find somewhere more appropriate for a useless girl to live. And the whip. That was when I said Papa hadn't run off." Caleb looked at her for a long moment. Then he stood up, went to the kitchen, and put the kettle on. He stood at the stove with his back to the door and breathed in through his nose and out through his mouth the way Clara had taught him to do back in the days when his temper had been a problem. Clara had been a patient woman, patient enough to teach a hard-headed man how to feel his anger without letting it make his decisions for him. He hadn't had much cause to practice that skill in 7 years. He was surprised to find it still worked. He made tea. He sweetened it with the last of his sugar, which he'd been rationing since the general store had raised its prices in June, and he brought it back out to Emmy, along with what remained of the morning's cornbread, which wasn't much but was something. She ate like she hadn't eaten in 2 days, which he suspected was approximately accurate. "How bad was it?" he asked when she'd finished. "The whip." She looked at him. "Do you need to see?" "Only if you're willing." She turned slightly on the settle and lifted the back of her dress far enough that he could see her shoulders. He looked. He said nothing. She let the fabric fall. "All right," he said. "All right what?" "All right, you're staying here." He stood up. "And all right, we're going to figure out what to do about your uncle." Emmy looked at him with those 2 old brown eyes. "You don't have to do that. Papa just asked you to keep me safe. He didn't ask you to fight anybody." "Your papa asked me to be your guardian." He picked up the letter and tucked it carefully into his shirt pocket. "Far as I'm concerned, that means making the world safe enough for you to live in it. Fighting whoever needs fighting is part of the arrangement. You could get hurt. I've been hurt before." He picked up the basin and the cloth. "I survived it." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Mrs. Hargrove said you lost your family." He stopped in the doorway to the kitchen, but didn't turn around. "I did," he said. "She said you haven't been the same since." "She's right." "Are you—" Emmy stopped, started again more carefully. "Are you going to be all right? Doing this?" He turned around then. She was watching him with an expression he recognized because he'd seen it in his own mirror during the first year after Clara and Rose had died, that particular combination of needing something desperately and being terrified of wanting it too much. "Emmy," he said, "I have $9 to my name, a carpenter's toolbox, and a bad knee that aches every time the weather changes. I am not by any conventional measure the ideal man for this situation." She waited. "But I gave you my word, and I don't break my word." He set down the basin. "So yes, I'm going to be all right." She looked at him for a long time. Then she looked down at her hands in her lap. "Thank you," she said. It came out very small, like she wasn't sure she deserved to say it. "Don't thank me yet," he said. "We've got work to do." He went back to the kitchen and started thinking. $9. A carpenter's tools. A bad knee. The law in Harlan County moved at its own pace, which was to say slowly, and in the direction of whoever had the most money, which at present was Darius Cole. Ward Keller. The county sheriff was not a corrupt man exactly, but he was a cautious one, and caution in the face of the Cole family's resources had historically translated into a particular kind of blindness. But Darius didn't know the will existed. Or rather, Caleb corrected himself. Pulling the letter out again and reading the relevant section, Darius knew there had been a will because he'd been present when their mother died, but he didn't know where Samuel had hidden his copy. And without the will, without a physical document, the legal case was significantly harder to make in court. The will was in the tack room. Fourth board he read again. Third board. Left wall, a tin box. He looked out the kitchen window at the sky, which was doing exactly what he'd feared, building up dark and heavy to the west, the kind of clouds that promised serious weather before morning. He looked at the calendar on the wall. Clara had put it up in 1871, and he'd replaced it every year since, out of habit, tearing off the old pages and pinning up the new ones, which was probably the most absurd ongoing project of his widowhood. But there it was. Today was the 9th of August, 1878. He did not have time to wait for the law to catch up. He heard Emmy shift on the settle in the front room, and then he heard her voice quietly asking the empty room a question she didn't expect an answer to. "Are you real?" she said. He thought she was talking to herself, or perhaps to God, or perhaps to the particular kind of hope that 10-year-old girls in desperate situations sometimes directed at the universe. "I'm real," he called back. A pause. "Okay," she said. Just that. "Okay." Caleb Dawson folded the letter, put it back in his pocket, and began to plan. He hadn't felt like himself in 7 years. He hadn't felt like much of anything, really. Just a man going through the motions of a life that no longer had much purpose, building furniture for other people's homes, because he needed something to do with his hands, and because the money kept him fed. He'd stopped caring about most things gradually, the way a fire goes out, not all at once, but in stages, dimming and dimming, until one day there's nothing left but ash. But the letter in his pocket was doing something to him that he hadn't expected. It wasn't anger exactly, though there was anger in it. It wasn't grief, though that was there, too familiar and close. It was something older and more basic than either of those things. It was the feeling of being needed, of being the specific person in the specific place at the specific moment when something important was required of him. He'd forgotten what that felt like. He rolled up his sleeves and started to think in earnest. The coal ranch was 4 miles east. Darius would know by now that Emmy had run. He'd be looking, but he'd expect her to run north toward town, toward witnesses and civilization. He wouldn't expect her to have gone to Caleb Dawson's property, because there was no reason for Caleb Dawson to be involved in this at all, not yet. That gave them a window. Maybe a day. Maybe less if Darius was thorough. They needed the will before that window closed. "Emmy," he called. She appeared in the kitchen doorway, moving carefully, one hand on the frame. She'd found a blanket somewhere, Clara's blue blanket from the trunk in the corner, and wrapped it around her shoulders. "You know that ranch," he said. "You grew up on it." "Yes, sir." "The tack room your papa mentioned. The guards your uncle keeps. How many men does he have working that property?" She thought about it. Seriously, like a person doing a genuine accounting, not guessing. "4 regulars," she said. "Maybe 6 if he called in help when he realized I'd gone. He keeps 2 on the north fence overnight and 1 at the bunkhouse. The main house has Uncle Darius, and nobody else after dark. He doesn't like people in the house at night." "And the tack room?" "It's attached to the barn. There's 1 door and 2 windows. The window on the west side doesn't latch right, it never has. Papa always meant to fix it." Caleb looked at her. "You've thought about this before," he said. She met his eyes. "I've been thinking about it since Papa left." 7 years of grief had made Caleb Dawson a man who expected very little from the world. He had stopped being surprised by cruelty, because cruelty had become familiar, and he had stopped being surprised by kindness, because kindness had mostly stopped reaching him in quantities worth noticing. But this child, 10 years old, barefoot, welted and bruised and exhausted, had walked 4 miles on bleeding feet to bring him a letter and a plan, and was now standing in his kitchen doorway with Clara's blanket around her shoulders, explaining guard rotations like a small, solemn general. He felt something shift in his chest, something he'd thought was permanently sealed. "All right," he said. "Here's what we're going to do." Caleb told Emmy to sleep. She didn't argue, which told him how far past her limit she already was. He watched her settle onto the settle with Clara's blanket pulled to her chin, and he watched her eyes close, and he watched her body do that particular thing that exhausted children's bodies do, going from rigid and guarded to deeply, completely limp inside of about 4 minutes. He stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at her for a long moment. Then he went to work. He had a lantern, half a tin of coal oil, a coil of rope that was mostly sound, a skinning knife that needed sharpening, and a Colt revolver he hadn't fired in 3 years. He found the revolver in the bottom of the trunk at the foot of the bed, under the folded clothes he hadn't moved since Clara died, and he held it in his hands for a moment and felt the weight of it and thought about what it meant to pick something like that back up. He cleaned it, loaded it, put it in his belt. Then he sat at the kitchen table and drew a rough map from memory of the coal ranch as he understood it, and compared that to what Emmy had told him, and corrected it in several places, and sat looking at it until the candle burned down to a stub, and the night outside had gone fully black and quiet. The rain had held off. That was something. He woke Emmy at 2 in the morning. He didn't have to wake her hard. She came alert fast, the way people do when they've been sleeping in dangerous places long enough that safety stops being their default assumption. "Is it time?" she said. "Getting close?" He set a cup of water on the settle beside her. "I need to ask you something first." She sat up, wrapping the blanket around her shoulders. "All right. Your uncle's men. You said 4 regulars, maybe 6 if he called for help. Do you know their names?" "Briggs and Fowler are the ones he trusts. The others are hired hands. They work for pay not loyalty. Papa always said Briggs and Fowler were the ones to worry about." "Briggs and Fowler," Caleb repeated. "Do they know you? Would they recognize you in the dark?" Emmy's expression went careful. "Yes, Briggs is the one who—" She stopped. "He's the one who held my arms." Caleb kept his face even. "When Darius used the whip?" "Yes." He nodded. "Then we go around the north pasture, not the south road. It's longer, but it keeps us away from the bunkhouse." "That's what I would have done," she said. "If I'd gone back alone." "You're not going back alone." She looked at him. "You're taking me with you. I thought you'd leave me here. You know where the board is. You know which window doesn't latch. You know the dog's name and whether it bites or just barks." He picked up the coil of rope. "I'd be walking in blind without you. But you stay close, and you do what I say when I say it. And if I tell you to run, you run and you don't stop." "Understood." Emmy stood up and let the blanket fall. She'd found a dark shawl in the trunk earlier. Clara's wool shawl, the dark brown one, and had it folded over her arm. She put it around her shoulders now, without being told, because she'd already understood that dark colors mattered on a night like this. "Understood," she said. They went out the back. The night was warm and smelled like rain, coming that particular electric smell that settles over Wyoming in August, when the sky is thinking about opening up. Caleb moved carefully, testing his bad knee on the uneven ground, keeping his hand back to check Emmy's pace every 50 feet or so. She moved quietly. Better than quietly, she moved like someone who'd had practice moving without being heard, which told him something about the kind of months she'd been living through. They didn't speak for the better part of an hour. The land east of Caleb's property rolled into low scrub and creek-bed willows before opening up again into the coal range, and they picked their way through it by starlight and instinct, Emmy slightly ahead once they crossed onto territory she knew. "The dog," Caleb said quietly when they could see the outline of the barn ahead. "Where does he sleep?" "By the kitchen door, west side of the main house. We're going to the barn. He won't come that far unless he hears something." "What's his name?" "Jasper." "Does he know you?" "He loves me." She said it without sentimentality, just as fact. "He'd come to me if he heard me, and that would make noise." Then we're quiet. They reached the barn wall and pressed against it, and Caleb listened. He could hear one of the horses shifting inside, and the distant sound of the north fence wind in the wire, and nothing else. No voices. No footsteps. The 2 men on the north fence were far enough away that they wouldn't see the barn door unless they were looking directly at it. "The window," he said. Emmy moved along the wall to the second window and put her hands on the frame and pushed, and it gave swinging inward on a hinge that whispered rather than creaked. She looked back at him. He boosted her up and through, and she dropped inside without a sound, and a moment later she had the barn door open from the inside, not wide, just enough for a man to pass through sideways, Inside the dark was total. Caleb stood still and let his eyes adjust and listened to the horses settle back into their nighttime quiet. There were 4 of them in the stalls, and one of them, a gray, near the far wall, raised its head and looked at him with calm curiosity before losing interest. "Third board," Emmy said very close to his ear. "Left wall." He felt along the wall with his hands. Old wood, rough and dry. He counted the boards from the corner. 1, 2, 3. He pressed. The board flexed slightly at the top, and he got his fingers behind it and pulled, and it came away from its peg with a soft scrape of wood on wood. Behind it, a tin box about the size of a Bible. He got it out and handed it to Emmy, who held it against her chest with both arms, like it was the most valuable thing she'd ever touched, which in every meaningful sense it was. "Open it," she said. "Not here. We open it at home with light so we can read what we've got." "But what if it's not, Emmy?" He put his hand briefly on her shoulder. "It's there. Your father knew what he was doing. We take it home, we read it properly, and then we know what we're working with." She held the box tighter and nodded. That was when they heard the voices. 2 men coming around the south side of the barn, not hurrying, but not idle, either the kind of walk that meant someone had been sent to check something specific. Caleb pulled Emmy back against the far wall without a word and put himself between her and the door. Said he saw a light near the Dawson property. That was a voice Caleb didn't recognize. Young, a little nervous. "Darius wants the whole perimeter checked. There's no light." A second voice, older, flat, dismissive. "Weather's making everybody jumpy." "I'm just saying what Darius said. And I'm saying if Darius thinks that little girl walked 4 miles in the dark with busted feet to hide at some broken-down carpenter's place, he's giving her a lot more credit than she deserves." The older voice paused. "Check the barn door, and let's get back." Caleb pressed Emmy behind him and put his back to the wall beside the door. The barn door moved. It opened 3 inches, then stopped. The man on the other side held his lantern up, and the light swept across the center of the barn floor in a wide arc, missing the far wall, where Caleb and Emmy stood by a matter of feet. One of the horses shuffled. The lantern held. Then the older voice said, "Horses are settled. Door's fine. Come on." The light withdrew. The door pulled shut. Footsteps moving away south and then west, diminishing into the dark. Emmy had not made a sound. She had not moved. She had barely breathed. Caleb turned to look at her in the near darkness, and she looked back at him, and he could see in the set of her mouth and the steadiness of her eyes that she had made a decision somewhere in the last 3 inches of lantern light. A decision about fear, about whether she was going to let it own her or whether she was going to carry it and keep moving. "Ready," he said. "Yes," she said. They went back out the window. They made it to the edge of the coal property before the trouble came from a direction Caleb hadn't anticipated. He heard the horse before he saw it, hooves on hard ground coming from the east, moving fast for this hour of the night. He put his arm out and stopped Emmy on instinct, and they pressed into the shadow of a stand of scrub willow and waited. The rider pulled up 20 feet from them and called out, not loud, but clear to someone Caleb couldn't see yet. "Briggs, hey Briggs." Another set of hoofbeats slower coming from the north. The man called Briggs. "What is it?" "Darius wants you at the house. Word came back from Cheyenne." A pause. "What kind of word?" "The kind that changes things." The first rider's voice dropped, but the night was still enough to carry it. "Samuel Cole is dead. Fell from his horse on the Cheyenne Road, they're saying, but Darius ain't saying that's how it happened. He wants all the papers in the house before morning, and he wants to know where the girl is." Caleb did not move. He felt Emmy go rigid beside him, a full-body stillness that was worse than any sound she could have made. And he put his hand on her arm and kept it there steady and firm, and felt her trembling against his palm. Her father was dead. The riders moved off toward the main house, and Caleb waited until he couldn't hear them anymore, and then he waited another 2 minutes, and then he turned to Emmy. She was looking at the ground. Her shoulders were shaking. "Emmy," he said. She looked up. Her eyes were dry. She had gone somewhere behind them, that place children go when the worst thing happens and the body decides that falling apart is a luxury it cannot currently afford. He said, "Fell from his horse," she said. "I heard." "Papa doesn't fall from horses." Her voice was completely flat. "He's been riding since he was 5 years old. He doesn't fall." "No," Caleb said. "I don't reckon he does." She held the tin box tighter. "Is that why he sent the letter? Because he knew something might happen to him?" "I think your papa was a man who planned for things he hoped wouldn't happen. That's not weakness, that's love." She breathed. It was a careful, controlled breath, the kind that is doing enormous work behind the scenes. "Darius killed him." "I don't know that yet." "I do." She looked up at him with those old, clear brown eyes. "I've known what kind of man my uncle is for a long time. So did Papa." Caleb thought about the letter in his shirt pocket. "I know I have no right to ask this of you." Samuel Cole had written that sentence, knowing, or at least suspecting, that he might be writing it with very little time left. He'd sent his daughter into the Wyoming night with a broken wrist and a plan and a name. And that name had been Caleb Dawson, a man he barely knew, because there was no one else. Caleb felt the weight of that in a way that had nothing to do with guilt and everything to do with obligation. "Here's what I know," he said. "Your father named me your guardian in those documents, and those documents are in that box. And that means starting right now tonight, you are my responsibility and my family. And Darius Cole can want whatever he wants to want, but he is going to have to come through me to get to you. Do you understand what I'm telling you?" She looked at him for a long moment. "You mean it?" she said. It wasn't a question exactly. "I mean every word. Even though Papa is—" She stopped. The word wouldn't come. "Even so," he said. "Maybe especially because of that." She made a sound then, just one small and tight, like something escaping through a crack she hadn't intended to leave open. Then she pressed her lips together and lifted her chin, and Caleb watched her make the same decision Clara had made 100 times over the years, the decision to grieve later and act now, because the situation required it. "Then let's go home," Emmy said. They made it back to his property before the first suggestion of gray in the east. Caleb got Emmy settled at the kitchen table with the lantern lit and the tin box in front of her, and he sat across from her and they opened it together. The will was there, 2 pages formal and clear, witnessed by a notary in Laramie and dated 3 years prior. Everything Emmy had said it contained was there. The Western Range, the main house, the Mustang herd, all of it designated to Samuel Cole outright. And at the bottom, in a separate addendum, dated 6 months ago, Samuel had added a provision for Emmy's guardianship naming Caleb Dawson, specifically with a second notary's signature beside his own. Caleb read the addendum twice. Samuel Cole had arranged all of this 6 months ago. Had planned it, had it witnessed, had hidden it away, and had trusted Widow Hargrove with the directions to find it. A man who had been watching the danger build for months and had done everything a careful man could do to protect his daughter in his absence. "He planned all of this," Emmy said. She was reading over Caleb's arm, her finger tracing the notary's seal. "He knew. He did everything right," Caleb said. "And because he did, you're going to be all right. Will the law honor it?" Her voice was careful, practical. She'd been thinking about this already. "Darius has money. He has men. Sheriff Keller. Ward Keller is a cautious man, but he's not a dishonest one." Caleb set the pages down flat on the table and looked at them. "What he is a man who needs something solid in front of him before he'll act. And this," he pressed 2 fingers lightly to the will, "is solid. This is a notarized legal document signed by a Laramie attorney. Keller can't ignore it. He won't. He might try to wait. He might." Caleb stood. "That's why we're not waiting for him to come to us." Emmy looked up. "As soon as it's light," he said. "I'm going to ride to Widow Hargrove's place and to Doc Crane's. I need witnesses who knew your condition when you arrived. I need medical documentation of your injuries, because that's evidence of what Darius has been doing that's separate from any property dispute. And then I'm going to Ward Keller's office with this will and those witnesses, and I am going to stand in his doorway until he does his job. And me. You're coming with me, every step." He looked at her. "You're the evidence, Emmy. You're walking proof that those documents matter. Nobody's leaving you alone while Darius Cole has men looking." She absorbed this. Then she said, "Caleb." "Yeah. I don't have anywhere to go. After all of this, I mean. Even if the ranch is mine by law, I'm 10. I can't run a ranch." "You don't have to run it yet." He started for the back room to get his good coat. "That's what I'm for." There was a long silence. Then Emmy said quietly from the kitchen table, "Papa picked the right man." Caleb stopped in the doorway. He didn't turn around. "He gave me the chance to be," he said. "That's all any of us can ask." He went to get the coat, and outside the window the eastern sky was turning from black to gray, to the first faint blush of something that might eventually become morning. They rode out at first light, Emmy in front of Caleb on the saddle, the tin box wrapped in oilcloth and tucked inside his coat against his chest. The gray mare Bess knew the road to Widow Hargrove's place well enough to find it half asleep, which was approximately the state Caleb was in after a night without rest. But the coffee he'd made before they left was doing its work, and the cool of the early morning was doing the rest, and by the time they turned up the lane to Nettie Hargrove's farmhouse, he felt something close to alert. Nettie Hargrove was already on her porch. She was 71 years old, built like a fence post, and twice as stubborn, and she had a shotgun across her knees that she lowered exactly 1 inch when she recognized Caleb's mare. "I've been waiting on you since midnight," she said. "Figured you'd either come to me or Darius Cole's men would. Glad it was you." "You knew we'd go for the will," Caleb said. "I knew Emmy would." Nettie stood and pushed open the door behind her. "Get in here, both of you. I've got biscuits and something to tell you that won't wait." Inside, Emmy went straight to the table, and Caleb unwrapped the tin box and set it in front of Nettie, who opened it with hands that didn't shake at all, read the first page of the will in about 40 seconds, and set it down. "Good," she said. "Samuel did it right." "He did," Caleb agreed. "What won't wait?" Nettie looked at Emmy first. A long, careful look, the kind that takes inventory. Then she looked at Caleb. "Darius Cole was in town last night, late. He went to Ward Keller's house, not the office, the house, and he was there for close to 2 hours. Caleb set down his coffee cup. "That's not a courtesy call," he said. "No, it is not." Nettie crossed her arms. "I don't know what was said, but Ray Tibbs, he runs the livery. You know, Ray saw Darius come out of Keller's place, and he said Darius looked satisfied. And Darius Cole does not look satisfied unless he's gotten something he wanted." Emmy said, "He's already told the sheriff his version." "Most likely," Nettie said. "Which means when you walk into Keller's office this morning, Keller's already heard a story. And the story he heard wasn't yours." Caleb thought about Ward Keller. He'd known the man for 15 years, had built the bookshelves in his front room and the cabinet in his office. Keller wasn't corrupt, but Nettie was right. He was cautious, and cautious men who'd heard one side of a story first had a way of treating the second side as the one that required proof. "Then we bring proof," Caleb said. "Nettie, I need you to come with us to Doc Crane's first, and then to Keller's office. I need you to tell Keller when Emmy arrived at your place what condition she was in and what you gave her to take to me." "I'll do more than that," Nettie said. She went to the sideboard and came back with a folded paper. "I wrote it down last night. Everything I observed with the date and time and my signature at the bottom. Clara always said you were stubborn as a post, Caleb Dawson, but she also said you were thorough. Be thorough today." He took the paper. "Thank you, Nettie." "Don't thank me. I've known Emmy since she was born, and I've watched what Darius Cole has been doing to that family for 2 years. Her voice went flat and certain. "I'll stand up in any courtroom in Wyoming and say what I saw. You just get us there." Emmy had been quiet through all of this. Now she looked up from the table and said, "Mrs. Hargrove, did you know about Papa?" Nettie's face changed. Just slightly, but enough. "Ray Tibbs brought word last night. I'm sorry, sweetheart." Emmy nodded once slowly. "Do you believe he fell from his horse?" Nettie met the girl's eyes without flinching. "No," she said. "I don't." The word landed in the room like a stone dropping into still water, and the three of them sat with the ripples of it for a moment before Caleb stood and said, "Then let's go make sure it means something." Doc Crane was a small, precise man of 50-something who had practiced medicine in Harlan County for 20 years and had the particular manner of someone who had seen enough human damage to be matter-of-fact about it without being unkind. He took one look at Emmy when they walked through his door and said, "Sit down, child," in a tone that allowed no argument, and he spent 30 minutes examining her with the methodical care of a man building a case as much as treating a patient. When he was done, he washed his hands at the basin and turned to Caleb. "The welts on her back and arm are consistent with a braided leather implement," he said. "The bruising on her face is from a closed fist. The lacerations on her feet are consistent with extended walking over rough terrain without footwear." He paused. "The injuries to her back are not recent. There are at least 3 distinct stages of healing that I can identify, which means this has been happening over a period of weeks, not days." Caleb kept his face even. "Will you put that in writing?" he said. "I already am." Doc Crane was at his desk writing. "I'll have a signed medical statement ready in 10 minutes. And Caleb." He looked up. "I want to testify if it comes to that. This child should not have been treated this way. Not by anyone. Not for any reason." "I'm hoping it doesn't come to a trial," Caleb said. "I'm hoping the documents are enough to settle this legally and quickly." They rode into Harlan County's main street at 8:30 in the morning, Caleb and Emmy on Bess Nettie Hargrove, in her buggy beside them. Doc Crane's signed statement folded with the will in the oilcloth packet inside Caleb's coat. It was a Tuesday, which meant the street had its usual morning traffic. The general store opened the livery already busy, 2 or 3 men outside the feed store, having the same conversation they'd probably been having since Monday. They stopped having it when they saw Caleb and Emmy. Caleb noticed this without reacting to it. People watching was not in itself a problem. People watching meant people witnessing, and witnesses were exactly what he needed today. He tied Bess at the rail outside the sheriff's office and lifted Emmy down and squared his shoulders and went inside. Ward Keller was at his desk. He was a big man, Keller broad across the chest with a gray mustache he'd had since before Caleb met him, and a habit of lacing his fingers together on the desktop when he was thinking. He was doing that now. He looked up when Caleb came in, and something moved across his face there and gone too fast to name precisely. "Caleb," he said. "Ward." Caleb set the oilcloth packet on the desk. "I need about 20 minutes of your time, and I need you to listen with an open mind. Can you do that for me?" Keller looked at Emmy, who had come in behind Caleb and was standing very straight beside him, with her hands clasped in front of her. "This is Emmy Cole," Caleb said. "Samuel Cole's daughter. I expect you've heard about Samuel." "I heard this morning," Keller said carefully. "Then you know she's alone in the world. And I expect you've also heard Darius Cole's version of the relevant facts given that he was at your house until 10 o'clock last night." Keller's expression shifted. Not guilty exactly, more like a man recalibrating. "He came to inform me about his brother's accident." "I'm sure he did." Caleb opened the oilcloth and laid the will on Keller's desk, then Nettie's written statement, then Doc Crane's medical report, setting them out one at a time like cards in a careful hand. "That's Samuel Cole's will, notarized in Laramie, witnessed by 2 parties designating Emmy as his heir and me as her legal guardian. That's Widow Hargrove's sworn written account of Emmy's condition when she arrived at her home yesterday before she came to me. And that is Doc Crane's medical statement on the nature, severity, and approximate timeline of Emmy's injuries." Keller looked at the documents without touching them. "Caleb Ward." Caleb's voice was quiet and even. "I've known you for 15 years. I've sat at your table and built shelves for your front room, and I've never once asked you for a favor. I'm not asking for one now. I'm presenting you with legal documentation of a crime and a child who has the injuries to prove it, and I'm asking you to do your job." The room was very quiet. Keller picked up the will and read it. Then he read it again. Then he picked up Doc Crane's report and read that. Nettie Hargrove appeared in the doorway. She looked at Keller the way she looked at everything straight on without apology. "I've known Ward Keller since his mother was alive," she said, "and I know he's a good man. Good men do the right thing when the right thing is clear." She nodded at the documents. "It's clear." Keller set down the medical report and looked at Emmy directly for the first time. "Emmy, did your uncle do this to you?" Emmy looked back at him without blinking. "Yes, sir, he did." "And you witnessed this?" Keller looked at Nettie. "I witnessed the results of it," Nettie said. "That child came to me with those injuries, and I gave her what she needed to get to Caleb. I'd do it again." Keller rubbed his hand across his face. He looked like a man doing a calculation he didn't particularly enjoy, but doing it honestly. "The will is legitimate. The guardianship is clear." He looked at Caleb. "You understand that Darius Cole is going to contest this." "Let him contest it in court," Caleb said. "That's what courts are for. All I'm asking you to do today is enforce what's already legally established." "If I ride out to the Cole ranch and serve papers." "I'll ride with you," Caleb said. "So will I," said Nettie. Keller looked at them both. Then he stood slow and deliberate the way large men move when they've made up their minds, and reached for his hat. "Give me an hour to get the emergency filing drawn up," he said. "And then yes, we ride." The hour felt like 3. Caleb sat on the bench outside the sheriff's office with Emmy beside him, close enough that their shoulders touched, and he felt the tension in her, the way you feel weather coming, not visible yet, but present in every nerve. "He might not honor it," Emmy said quietly. "Darius, even if the sheriff comes." "He might not," Caleb agreed. "And then what? Then what? And then Ward Keller arrests him for obstruction, and we take it before a judge, and the legal record shows that Darius Cole refused to comply with a lawful order." He looked at her. "Your uncle's power comes from nobody pushing back. The minute somebody does, he doesn't have as much as he thinks he has." Emmy was quiet for a moment. Then, "Are you scared?" The honest answer was yes, in the specific way that honest men are scared before necessary confrontations, not cowardice, but the body's accurate understanding that things can go wrong. But he'd made a decision in his kitchen 2 nights ago, when he'd picked up the Colt and loaded it and put it in his belt, and that decision was still holding. "A little," he said. "You, more than a little." She looked down at her hands. "But I'm more scared of what happens if we don't do this than what happens if we do." "That's courage," Caleb said. "That's exactly what courage is." She absorbed that. Then she said, "Caleb, when all of this is over, whatever way it goes, I want to do right by the Mustangs." Papa loved that herd. He said the Mustangs were the reason he fought to keep the ranch, not the land or the money. He said they were the last free thing left on the range, and somebody had to stand between them and the men who'd break them. Caleb thought about Clara's garden growing tomatoes out of sheer biological persistence, and the way he'd been keeping it going for 7 years for no reason he could fully articulate. "Some things are worth standing for, just because they're worth standing for," he said. "Your papa understood that." She nodded, and he could see her filing it away, somewhere deep into the place where people keep the things that sustain them through the worst of what's coming. Ward Keller came out of his office at 10 minutes before 10, papers in hand, and they rode for the Cole Ranch. They were 2 miles out when they saw the dust. Riders coming fast from the east. Not ranch hands on their morning rounds, these were men riding with purpose, spread wide, the kind of formation that meant they'd been sent out and given instructions. Keller pulled up his horse. "How many do you count?" Caleb counted. 5. "Briggs and Fowler," Emmy said. Her voice was steady. "And 3 others I don't know." The riders reached them and spread in a rough arc across the road. The man at the center was not Darius Cole. Darius wasn't here, which meant these men had been sent, which meant Darius was somewhere else, doing something else, while his men managed the road. That thought landed in Caleb's gut like a cold stone. The man at the center, big, dark-bearded, with a rifle laid across his saddle, looked at Keller first. "Sheriff," he said. Mr. Cole asks that you turn back. He says any legal matters can be addressed through his attorney in Laramie. That's not how this works, Briggs, Keller said. Mr. Cole says it is. Mr. Cole doesn't get to decide how the law works in my county. Keller held up the papers. I have a court order and a valid will and a minor child under legal guardianship. I am proceeding to the Cole Ranch to serve these documents, and I am doing it now. You can ride back and tell Darius that, or you can get out of my way. Either way, I'm going through. Briggs looked at the papers, then he looked at Emmy. Something moved in his face when he saw her, not guilt exactly, but something adjacent to it. The look of a man who knows what he's participated in and has decided not to examine it too closely. She's a Cole, he said. She belongs with her family. She belongs with her legal guardian, Caleb said. He hadn't spoken until now, and the quietness of his voice in contrast to the tension of the moment seemed to land harder than volume would have. Which is me. That's established in law, witnessed by a notary and sitting right there in the sheriff's hand. You want to argue with it? You hire a lawyer and you argue it in court. But today on this road, you're going to move. Briggs looked at him for a long moment. Caleb looked back. He did not reach for the Colt. He did not move his hand toward it. He simply held Briggs's gaze with the specific kind of steadiness that comes not from the absence of fear, but from having already counted the cost and decided it was worth paying. One of the men behind Briggs shifted in his saddle. Not Fowler. One of the others younger, whose horse was sidling sideways in that nervous way horses have when they pick up something from their riders. Briggs, the young man said quietly. Briggs looked at the papers again. Then he looked at Keller, and then at Caleb, and then finally at Emmy, and whatever he saw in her face, that 10-year-old girl, looking back at him with absolutely no fear in her eyes, made something in his jaw go tight. He reined his horse sideways. "We're not done," he said to Caleb. "Probably not," Caleb agreed. The road cleared and they rode on. But Caleb kept his hand close to his coat for the rest of the ride because the cold stone in his gut was telling him that Darius Cole had not sent his men to stop them on the road. He'd sent them to slow them down. And while 5 men were slowing them down on the road, Darius Cole was somewhere else doing something, and the question of what that something was had started to feel urgent in a way Caleb didn't like at all. They came over the last rise and saw the Cole Ranch below them, and Caleb's hand moved to the Colt without his deciding it because there were horses at the main house that hadn't been there this morning, and there was smoke from the kitchen chimney, though it was too late in the day for a kitchen fire, and there was a figure on the porch who was not a ranch hand. Darius Cole was waiting for them. He'd been there the whole time. Darius Cole was not what Caleb had expected, which was itself a kind of warning. He'd built a picture in his mind over the past 24 hours. A brutal man, a big man. The kind of man whose cruelty was written in his size and his voice, and the way he moved through a room. What he saw on that porch was something more dangerous than that. Darius Cole was lean and composed somewhere in his mid-50s, with the kind of face that had learned a long time ago to show exactly what it chose to show, and nothing else. He was dressed well. He held a cup of coffee in one hand, like he was receiving guests on a Sunday morning. He smiled when he saw them come over the rise. That smile told Caleb everything he needed to know about how this man had operated for so long without consequence. "Ward," Darius said pleasantly, as Keller rode into the yard. "I figured you'd come out. Saved you the trouble of sending word." He looked at Caleb. "Dawson, I don't believe we've met formally." "We haven't," Caleb said. "And Emmy." The smile didn't change, but something behind it did a flicker of something cold and calculating that came and went so fast Emmy might have missed it. She didn't miss it. Caleb felt her hands tighten where they gripped his arm from behind the saddle. "I'm glad you're safe, sweetheart. I've had men looking for you since yesterday. You had me worried." "Mr. Cole," Keller said, and his voice was doing the careful work of a man who had decided to be professional, regardless of what he was feeling. "I have documents here that need to be served. I'd appreciate your cooperation." "Of course." Darius set down his coffee cup on the porch rail and descended the steps with the easy confidence of a man who had already won and was now simply managing the formality of the other side figuring it out. "Let me see what you've got." Keller handed him the papers. Darius read them. He read them slowly, and his face did not change at all, which was itself a performance, because no man reads a legal document establishing that his dead brother's child owns the ranch he's been trying to claim for 2 years and feels nothing. The nothing on Darius Cole's face was a choice, and a practiced one. "This will," Darius said, finally holding it up slightly, "is dated 3 years ago." "That's correct," Keller said. "My mother's estate was settled 18 months ago. The settlement superseded any prior arrangements." He folded the papers with deliberate care and held them back out to Keller. "I have the settlement documents in the house, filed with the Laramie court, signed by a judge. I'd be happy to show them to you." Caleb got down from the saddle. He did it slowly with intention so that Darius could see it happening and understand what it meant. "Ward," he said, "don't take those papers back." Keller looked at him. "A settlement of an estate doesn't invalidate a prior will unless the will was specifically named and contested in that settlement." "Was it?" He looked at Darius. "Was Samuel Cole present at the settlement hearing? Did he contest it? Or did the settlement happen while Samuel was contesting the ranch through other means, and you simply didn't tell the court a valid will existed?" Something moved in Darius's eyes. Just for a moment. "You're a carpenter," Darius said. "I can read," Caleb said, "and I've read that will 3 times. It's sound." "Mr. Cole." Keller's voice had shifted, not aggressive, but firmer. "I'm going to need to see those settlement documents." "Certainly." Darius turned toward the house. "Come inside. I'll have my man find them." "We'll wait here," Caleb said. Darius paused with his back to them. A brief pause, barely perceptible. Then he turned around and looked at Caleb with an expression that had stopped pretending to be pleasant. "You have no standing here, Dawson." "The guardianship provision gives me standing." Caleb reached into his coat and produced his copy of the will. He'd kept it separate from the packet he'd given Keller deliberately. "Emmy Cole is my legal ward. Her interests are my interests. Her property is under my protection until she comes of age. That's established in law, and you know it." Emmy spoke from behind him. She had climbed down from Bess while Caleb was talking and had moved to stand slightly to his left, not behind him, beside him, and her voice, when it came, was the clearest thing in the yard. "Where's my father's body, Uncle Darius?" The yard went quiet. It was the question nobody had said out loud yet, and the asking of it by a 10-year-old girl with welts on her arm and a bruise on her face landed in the silence like a hammer. Darius looked at her. "Emmy, sweetheart, your father had an accident." "Papa didn't fall from horses," she said. "You know that. Everyone who knew him knows that. He'd been riding since before you were much older than I am." She kept her eyes on his face. "I'm asking where his body is because he deserves a proper burial, and you're the one who had men on the Cheyenne Road." "That is a serious accusation," Darius said very quietly. "It's a question," Emmy said. "If you didn't do anything wrong, it should be easy to answer." Caleb watched Darius Cole look at his 10-year-old niece and calculate. He could see the calculation happening, how much this child knew, how much she could prove, how much damage she could do simply by standing in a sheriff's yard and asking questions in that clear, steady voice. "Ward," Darius said, turning to Keller, "I'd like to speak with my attorney before this goes any further." "That's your right," Keller said. He took the papers firmly back from Darius's hand. "But the will stands until a court says otherwise, and the guardianship stands with it. Emmy Cole goes with Caleb Dawson today. That's not negotiable." The settlement. "Bring the settlement documents to my office in town by end of day. If they supersede the will, a judge will make that determination." Keller put the papers in his coat. "Until then, this child stays with her legal guardian." Darius looked at Keller for a long moment. Then he looked at Caleb. Then finally he looked at Emmy, and there was something in that look that made Caleb shift his weight forward slightly. Not a threat exactly, but a readiness. "Fine," Darius said. He said it like a man setting something down that he intended to pick back up. For now. He went back inside and closed the door. The yard breathed again. Nettie Hargrove, who had stayed in her buggy through the entire exchange, with the stillness of a woman conserving her energy for what mattered, spoke for the first time. "That man has no intention of going to your office, Ward." "No," Keller agreed. "He doesn't." "Then what happens now?" Emmy said. Keller looked at the closed door of the ranch house. Then he looked at the men in the yard. There were 3 of Darius's hands, visible hanging back at the fence, and the bunkhouse doorway, watching. Not Briggs, not Fowler. The others, the hired men, the ones who worked for pay, and not loyalty. "Now," Keller said, "I post one of my deputies at the end of the road, and I send a wire to the circuit judge in Laramie, and I build a legal case that doesn't depend on Darius Cole's cooperation." He looked at Caleb. "You did good today. You came in with documents and witnesses, and you didn't give him anything to push against." "He'll find something," Caleb said. "He'll try." Keller gathered his reins. "But trying and succeeding are 2 different things. Let's get Emmy back to your place and get that wire sent." They were halfway down the ranch road when the sound of a horse coming fast from behind made Caleb turn in the saddle. It was one of the hired hands, the young one from the road, the one whose horse had been sidling. He rode up alongside them and pulled his horse in without ceremony, looking at Keller. "Sheriff." He was breathing hard. "My name's Pete Aldis. I've been working this ranch for 3 months. He glanced back toward the main house, then forward again. "I want to talk to you. Not here. Not with Briggs watching." Keller studied him. "What about—" Pete Aldis looked at Emmy, then at Caleb, then back at Keller. "About the Cheyenne Road," he said. "And what I saw 3 days ago." The cold stone in Caleb's gut turned over. "Ride with us," Keller said immediately. They kept moving, and Pete Aldis rode beside Keller, with the tight forward-leaning posture of a man who has made a decision and is committed to it before he can talk himself back out. "Darius sent Briggs and Fowler on Wednesday," he said. "I wasn't supposed to know where, but I helped saddle the horses and I heard the road they were taking." He swallowed. "Samuel Cole was on that road." "Did you see them come back?" Keller's voice was careful and precise. "Thursday morning, before light, both of them." Pete kept his eyes on the road ahead. "Briggs had blood on his sleeve. He said he'd cut himself on wire." Another swallow. "There wasn't any wire job done that week. I checked." Emmy made no sound. Caleb reached back and put his hand briefly on her arm, and she gripped his wrist with both hands and held on. "Will you swear to that?" Keller said. "That's why I'm telling you," Pete said. "I hired on here for ranch work. I didn't sign up for—" He stopped. "I didn't sign up for this. You'll need to come to my office and make a formal statement." "I know it." He looked over his shoulder once more. "But I'm not going back to that ranch. Whatever Darius is paying isn't worth what I'd be covering up." Keller nodded. "You'll ride with us then." They made it back to Harlan's Main Street by noon, and the wire to the Laramie circuit judge went out within the hour. Pete Aldis gave his statement in Keller's office with Caleb and Nettie as witnesses, his voice steady throughout, in the way that voices are steady when a person is holding themselves together through sheer determination. When he was done, he looked older than he had on the road. "What happens to me now?" he said. "Nothing bad," Keller said. "You did the right thing. Briggs will come after me when he finds out I talked. Then you stay in town for now." Keller looked at Caleb. "You got room?" "I've got a loft," Caleb said. "It's not comfortable, but it's safe." Pete looked at Emmy, who had been sitting in the corner of Keller's office through the entire statement, silent, and contained processing things in that interior way she had that Caleb was beginning to recognize as her particular form of strength. "I'm sorry about your father," Pete said. "He seemed like a decent man, from what I could tell." Emmy looked at him for a moment. "He was," she said simply. The afternoon shifted and settled, and for a few hours it seemed like the machinery of law and documentation might be enough that the wire to Laramie, the sworn statements, The medical report, the will itself, might create a structure solid enough to hold Darius Cole at bay until a judge could make it permanent. Then at 3:30, Ray Tibbs from the livery came through the door of the sheriff's office at a pace that told Caleb before a word was spoken that something had changed. "Darius Cole just rode into town," Ray said. "Him and Briggs and Fowler and 2 men I've never seen before. They're at the land office." Keller stood immediately. "The land office." "He's got papers, Ward. Lot of papers. Harold Fitch opened up for him special, and they've been in there close to 40 minutes. Harold Fitch was the county land recorder. The land office held all the property filings for Harlan County. And Caleb understood in the same moment that Keller did what Darius Cole was doing in there, not challenging the will in court, not taking the legal road that left him exposed. He was filing something, amending something, creating a competing paper trail that would take months to untangle in front of a judge, months during which Emmy's claim would be in limbo, and the ranch would sit in a legal gray zone that Darius could exploit. "He's going around us," Caleb said. "He's trying to—" Keller said, already moving for the door. "Stay here with Emmy. Ward, stay here." Keller's voice was firm. "This part is mine to handle. You've done your part." Caleb stopped. He looked at Emmy, who had come to stand beside him, and he made himself think clearly, rather than act on the urgency pushing at him from all directions. Emmy said quietly, "He's buying time." "Yes." "How much time does he need?" Caleb thought about it. If he gets a competing filing on record before Laramie responds to Ward's wire, it could take weeks to sort out which document has legal precedence. Weeks where nothing is settled. Weeks where he has access to the ranch and the Mustangs and— He stopped. "And me," Emmy said. "He's not getting near you," Caleb said. "That's finished." But the ranch, one thing at a time. He looked at Nettie, who had settled into the chair beside Keller's desk, with her hands in her lap, and an expression of absolute patience that Caleb found in this moment more steadying than almost anything else in the room. "Nettie, the circuit judge. Do you know him?" Nettie looked at him. "Ezra Connell. I've known Ezra since he was a law clerk in Cheyenne." She paused one beat. "His mother and I were in the same quilting circle for 12 years. Would he respond faster to a wire from Ward?" Caleb said carefully, "or to a personal letter from you?" Nettie Hargrove was quiet for exactly 2 seconds. Then she stood up, went to Keller's desk, pulled out a sheet of paper and a pen, and sat down. "Hand me the ink," she said. Caleb handed her the ink. Emmy pulled the second chair close and watched Nettie write, and Caleb stood at the window, looking out at the street, watching the door of the land office down the block, watching the horses tied outside it, watching the dust and the ordinary Tuesday afternoon of Harlan County, going about its business around the extraordinary pressure building at its center. And then the door of the land office opened, and Darius Cole came out, and he looked down the street toward the sheriff's office with that same composed, deliberate face, and when his eyes found the window where Caleb was standing, neither man looked away for a long moment. Then Briggs came out behind Darius, and then Fowler, and then one of the men Caleb didn't recognize, and this man was carrying something. A long leather case, the kind used to protect documents in transit. New. Expensive. He was carrying it like it contained something that mattered. Caleb watched Darius take that case from the man's hands and hold it at his side, and the composed face arranged itself into something that was almost but not quite a smile. "Nettie," Caleb said without turning from the window, "how fast can you write?" "Faster than Darius Cole can ride to the telegraph office," she said, and her pen kept moving. Outside, Darius Cole looked at the window one more time. Then he turned, and he and his men walked toward the telegraph office on the far end of the street, and Caleb understood that whatever was in that leather case, Darius intended to send word of it to someone, a lawyer in Laramie, a judge he'd cultivated a contact in the Land Bureau who owed him a favor. The ground was shifting, and it was shifting fast, and in the corner of the room, Emmy Cole sat very still, with her hands flat on her knees, watching Caleb watch the window, and when he finally turned to look at her, she said the truest thing she'd said all day. "He's not going to stop," she said. "Not unless we make him." "I know it," Caleb said. "Then what do we do?" He looked at the door. He looked at Nettie's pen moving across the paper. He looked at Pete Aldous sitting in the corner with his sworn statement drying on Keller's desk. He looked at Doc Crane's report and the notarized will and the weight of everything they'd built in the past 18 hours, every careful, legal, methodical brick of it. And he thought about a man like Darius Cole, who had spent years building his own structure slower and more patient and better funded. And then the shot came through the front window. The shot took out the upper left corner of the window and buried itself in the wall above Keller's bookshelf, and for one suspended second, nobody in the room moved. Then Caleb moved. He crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled Emmy down behind the desk, putting his body between her and the window, and he heard Nettie hit the floor with a grunt that told him she was down, but not hurt, and Pete Aldous had already flattened himself against the wall beside the door, with the instinct of a man who'd been in dangerous situations before. "Stay down," Caleb said to Emmy. "I'm down," she said. Her voice was shaking, but her eyes were clear. He drew the Colt. The street outside had gone from ordinary Tuesday afternoon to complete silence in the span of 1 second, the way streets do when violence announces itself. Everyone who'd been moving had stopped frozen in doorways and behind wagons, the whole ordinary machinery of the town holding its breath. Caleb got to the wall beside the broken window and looked out at an angle, keeping himself out of the direct line. Fowler. He was across the street in the gap between the feed store and the land office, already moving, not running, repositioning the deliberate lateral movement of a man who'd fired one shot as a message and was now deciding whether to send another. And at the far end of the street, Darius Cole had not run. He was standing exactly where he'd been, the leather case in his hand, watching the sheriff's office with that composed, patient face. And Caleb understood in one cold flash of clarity what this was. It wasn't an assassination attempt. It was a demonstration. Darius was showing them. Showing Keller specifically what the cost of pushing forward would look like. A warning shot through a government window orchestrated by a man who was betting that a cautious sheriff would calculate the personal risk and find a reason to slow down. "Ward's still at the land office," Pete said from the wall. "Go get him," Caleb said. "Back door, stay low, and stay off the main street." Pete went without hesitating. Caleb looked at Nettie. She had pulled herself up into a crouch behind the desk, her back straight, and her expression carrying the specific ferocity of a 71-year-old woman who has had quite enough. "Are you hurt?" "I'm insulted," she said. "There's a difference." "Emmy, I'm all right." Emmy was still behind the desk, but she had the tin box in her arms again. She'd grabbed it when Caleb pulled her down, some deep instinct holding on to the one thing that made everything else possible. "Caleb, he fired into a sheriff's office." "He did." That's a federal offense, isn't it? That's not a land dispute anymore. That's what we needed," Caleb said, and he heard his own voice go very quiet and very certain. "Stay here." He went out the back door. He came around the south side of the building at a low angle, using the water trough for cover, and he came up on the feed store side of the street, moving fast and quiet with the Colt in his hand, and 7 years of grief, and 2 days of accumulated fury, doing something very useful in his chest, not blinding him, not making him reckless, but sharpening everything down to a single clear point. Fowler heard him coming. He turned fast, bringing his rifle up. Caleb was faster. Not with the gun, he didn't fire. He stepped inside the rifle's angle and hit Fowler's forearm with his left hand, knocking the barrel aside, and then he had the man's wrist locked and the Colt pressed under his chin, and the whole thing had taken approximately 2 seconds. "Put it down," Caleb said. Fowler put it down. "Now you're going to walk with me back to that sheriff's office, and you're going to sit in a cell, and you're going to wait for Ward Keller to decide what to do with a man who fires into a government building." He tightened his grip on the wrist. "And if you argue with me about it, I am going to lose my patience, and I have had a very long 2 days. Fowler did not argue. Keller came around the corner of the land office at a run with Pete Aldous behind him, and he stopped when he saw Caleb walking Fowler across the street with the Colt in his back, and something in Keller's face settled into a resolve that had not been quite there before. The warning shot had done the opposite of what Darius intended. Darius Cole, Keller said, and his voice carried down the whole length of the street, loud and deliberate, meant to be heard by everyone in every doorway and behind every wagon. You are under arrest for conspiracy to discharge a firearm at a peace officer and for the obstruction of lawful court proceedings. Come away from there and put your hands where I can see them." Darius Cole looked at Keller for a long moment. He looked at Fowler in Caleb's grip. He looked at the street around him, at the people watching from doorways, at Ray Tibbs, who had come out of the livery with his arms crossed, at Harold Fitch, who had emerged from the land office and was standing 2 feet from Darius, with an expression of profound discomfort, at Nettie Hargrove, who had appeared in the doorway of the sheriff's office, with a posture that made it absolutely clear she was prepared to be the last woman standing. He looked at all of it, and Caleb watched him calculate, and for one moment the calculation tipped. Caleb saw it, saw the weight of the options, saw Darius considering whether the 2 men at the far end of the street were still his, whether this could be recovered. Then Emmy walked out of the sheriff's office. She walked out slowly and deliberately, the tin box under one arm, and she came to stand beside Caleb on the street, and she looked at her uncle across the distance between them, and she didn't say anything at all. She just stood there. 10 years old, barefoot, still bruised, steady as a post in rock. Something went out of Darius Cole's face. Not the composure. The composure was still there right up until the moment it wasn't. What went out was the certainty beneath it. The bedrock certainty of a man who had never been genuinely stopped before, and had therefore stopped believing that stopping was possible. He handed the leather case to no one, just set it on the hitching rail beside him, and he put his hands up. Keller crossed the street and put the cuffs on Darius Cole himself. Briggs, it turned out, had seen the whole thing from the far end of the street. He rode out before anyone thought to stop him, which Keller noted, and wired ahead to the next county before the hour was out. But Briggs, without Darius Cole, was a man without an employer, without a purpose, and without the legal cover that Darius's money had provided. He would be found. The law was patient about such things when it had a reason to be. What came next was not quick. Caleb had not expected it to be quick. Justice, through legal and institutional means, moved at the pace of paperwork and circuit judges and witnesses who had to be deposed, and documents that had to be verified and filed and argued over by men in offices in Laramie who had never set foot in Harlan County. It was not dramatic. It was not satisfying in the immediate gut-level way that the moment of Darius putting his hands up had been satisfying. But it was permanent. Judge Ezra Connell arrived from Laramie 11 days after Nettie's letter reached him, 11 days, which was faster than the wire alone would have managed, which told Caleb something about the quilting circle. He reviewed the will, the settlement documents Darius had filed, Pete Aldis's sworn statement, Doc Crane's medical report, and 3 additional witness statements that Keller had collected in the intervening days from ranch hands who had decided, in the absence of Darius Cole's paycheck and his protection, that their conscience had been waiting long enough. The settlement Darius had used to obscure the will was declared procedurally fraudulent. Samuel Cole had not been notified of the hearing, a notification that was legally required, which meant the settlement had been obtained through deliberate concealment. The original will stood. Emmy Cole was confirmed as sole heir to the Cole Ranch, the Western Range, and the Mustang herd. Caleb Dawson was confirmed as her legal guardian. Connell read the ruling from Keller's office, with Emmy sitting in the chair across from his desk, and Caleb standing behind her with his hand on the back of the chair. And when it was done, the judge looked over his glasses at Emmy and said, "Do you understand what this means, young lady?" "It means the ranch is mine," Emmy said. "It means the ranch is yours," Connell agreed. "And it means nobody can take it from you." Emmy nodded once. She looked down at her hands, which were folded in her lap. Then she looked up. "What happens to my uncle?" Connell glanced at Keller, who had been standing by the window. "Darius Cole faces charges for conspiracy in the discharge of a firearm at a peace officer for fraudulent filing of estate documents, and for the criminal assault evidenced in the medical report. The matter of your father's death is under separate investigation by the county prosecutor." He paused. "It will take time, but the evidence is substantial." "Will he go to prison?" "That is for a jury to decide." Connell said carefully. But the evidence is substantial, he repeated, and the second time he said it carried the weight of a man who had read the file and formed his own opinion. Emmy was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "My father deserved better than what happened to him." "Yes," Connell said simply. "He did." It was Nettie Hargrove who organized the community supper 3 weeks after the ruling. She did it the way she did everything, without asking permission, without announcing it as a gesture, simply deciding it was necessary and making it happen. She showed up at Caleb's door on a Tuesday morning and told him there would be food at the church hall on Saturday, and that he and Emmy were expected, and that was the entirety of the conversation. What he hadn't anticipated was who would be there. Ray Tibbs came. Harold Fitch came with the slightly apologetic manner of a man who knows he opened his office for the wrong person and is looking for a way to make the ledger balance. Doc Crane came. Pete Aldis came, having taken a job at the Tibbs livery that suited him considerably better than working for Darius Cole had. 3 of the former ranch hands came, the hired men who had stood at the fence and the bunkhouse doorway during the confrontation at the Cole ranch and had subsequently made their own calculations and their own decisions. And the people of Harlan County who had watched from doorways and behind wagons on that Tuesday afternoon, who had seen a 10-year-old girl walk out of a sheriff's office and stand in a street and face down a man twice her age and 3 times her power, those people came too. Not all of them, but enough. Emmy moved through the hall with the careful, observing quality she brought to everything, and Caleb watched her from near the door and saw the exact moment the evening shifted for her, when Nettie took her hand and introduced her to people as Emmy Cole. Who's going to do her father proud with that ranch, not as an orphan or a ward or a child in difficult circumstances, but as herself defined by what she was going to do rather than what had been done to her. He saw Emmy stand a little straighter. He saw something ease in her shoulders that had been tight since the first night on his settle. He went outside for a few minutes. The August night had finally broken into something cooler, the summer loosening its grip, and he stood in the yard and looked up at the stars and thought about Clara, which he did most nights, and about Rose, which he did every night, and about the particular shape grief had taken for 7 years. The way it had made him small and careful and sealed a man going through the motions of living, because stopping entirely seemed like the wrong kind of statement. Emmy found him outside. She always seemed to know where he'd gone. "You're thinking about them," she said. "I am." She came to stand beside him. "Mrs. Hargrove told me about Clara and Rose. She said Clara was the best woman she knew." "That's accurate." "She said losing them broke you." He looked down at her. "She's not wrong." "Are you still broken?" He thought about the last 2 days, the planning at the kitchen table, the window that didn't latch the tin box, the street in Harlan, the Colt in his hand, and the certainty in his chest, and Emmy beside him in front of Darius Cole and the ruling read aloud in Keller's office, and the particular sensation of standing behind a child's chair with his hand on the back of it and feeling for the first time in 7 years that he was exactly where he was supposed to be. "Less so," he said, "than I was." Emmy nodded, satisfied with this, as an answer in a way that adults rarely were. "I'm going to need help running the ranch," she said, "when I'm older. I know it'll be years before I can manage it properly, but I want to learn everything before then, the horses especially." "I know it." "Will you teach me all of it, the horses, the land, the legal things, how to talk to judges without being scared?" "You talk to a judge without being scared," Caleb said. "You did that already." "I was terrified," she said. "I know. That's what makes it count." She was quiet for a moment. "I want to go to the cemetery," she said. "Before we go back, to where they said Papa might be buried over in the county plot. I want to—" She stopped. "I just want to go." "We'll go tomorrow," he said. "First thing." They went the next morning. The 2 of them on Bess in the early cool, and Emmy stood at her father's grave marker, simple wood not yet replaced with stone, but marked and cared for. And she talked to Samuel Cole for several minutes, in a voice too low for Caleb to hear. He stood back and let her have it, the privacy of grief, the specific conversation between a daughter and a father that no one else was meant to witness. When she came back to where he stood, her eyes were red, but her face was composed. "I told him about you," she said. "What did you tell him?" "I told him he picked the right man." She looked up at Caleb. "Same as I told you." He felt that settle somewhere deep in the place where sealed things live. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then he said, "Your father loved you enough to plan for every possibility and trust a stranger with your life. That's not a small thing. That's the biggest thing a man can do." "He trusted you," Emmy said. "That wasn't nothing." "No," Caleb said, "it wasn't." They rode back to the ranch. Emmy's ranch. The coal ranch, the western range, spread out in the morning light with the Mustang herd moving along the far fence line, those rough, beautiful horses that Samuel Cole had called the last free thing left on the range. Emmy watched them from the saddle with the particular attention of someone cataloging an inheritance they intend to honor. "We need to fix the north fence before winter," she said. "We do," Caleb agreed, "and the tack room board that was loose. We should fix that too." "I'm a carpenter," he said. "That's what I do." She turned to look at him over her shoulder, and for just a moment she looked exactly like what she was 10 years old. A child with a child's face, not the composed, careful, too-old creature that circumstances had required her to be. She looked like a girl who had just remembered that some things might turn out all right. "Caleb," she said. "Yeah, I'm glad it was your porch." He looked at the Mustangs on the fence line and thought about a screen door and a summer night, and 2 words spoken by a child in the dark. And he thought about Clara's garden, still growing tomatoes out of pure stubbornness, and he thought about the colt in the bottom of the trunk under folded clothes he hadn't moved in 7 years, and he thought about what it meant to be the specific person in the specific place when something important was required. "So am I," he said. They rode in through the gate of the Cole ranch together, the carpenter and the girl, and behind them the Mustangs ran the length of the fence. In the morning light, wild and stubborn and free, and the gate swung shut, and the work of building something worth having finally began.